Welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host, Rob Sheply here. And on today's episode, we are going to be doing a two-part series here. This part particularly elaborating on a lawsuit that the Pac-12 filed against the Mountain West, which they are calling the poaching penalty lawsuit. Now, we've heard the past couple of days the back and forth between the Pac-12 and the Mountain West in terms of the Pac-12 kind of poaching the Mountain West teams, the Mountain West trying to keep Air Force and UNLV and New Mexico and Hawaii and all these schools you know, trying to keep them away from each other. And unfortunately, the one of the obvious questions that I brought, I brought forth in the last episode was, to what extent could there just be a merger? But based on the comments from the Mountain West commissioner, it seemed evident even from the get go that the Pac-12, the long term plan was always for the Pac-12 to try and revitalize the conference in some capacity. And if you're the Mountain West, I mean, you had to know to some extent that your schools would be targeted. I mean, from a geographical perspective, and also the Boise States of the world. Utah State has definitely gotten better over the years. San Diego State's is a rising program. So when you put all these things together, it really shouldn't be a surprise at all that the Pac-12 is targeting the Mountain West. But the really the reality of this lawsuit is a couple things. I think first and foremost, Oregon State and Washington State were both under an immense amount of pressure to get a scheduling agreement done with the Mountain West. And the Mountain West definitely took full advantage of that because, when all the original Pac 12 teams left for the Big 10 and the Big 12 and, all those and the ACC, I mean, ultimately, there was only so much that those two can do collectively. So they knew in the interim they would have to, your two options were either join the Mountain West, which I don't see why the Mountain West wouldn't want them, or you stay in the Pac 12 and try to fight for yourselves. But, according to the agreement that they had last season in terms of the scheduling agreement, it called for a 1 year agreement. And in essence, the Mountain West included language within the agreement that they would pay that every school would pay a $10 million exit fee, and then it escalates 500,000 per additional school. So the target right now, in terms of if you're counting all five of those schools, I mean, we're talking in excess of 45-50 million dollars. That if it's exactly as black and white in this agreement as we would think, that's probably what they would owe them too. But the quote from the Pac-12 attorneys, quote, "This action challenges an anti-competitive and unlawful poaching penalty that the Mountain West Conference imposed on the Pac-12 to inhibit competition for member schools in collegiate athletics. The poaching penalty saddles the Pac-12 with exorbitant and punitive monetary fees for engaging in competition by accepting Mountain West Conference member schools into the Pac-12." Boom, got it. Yeah, and they right now, as it would be required right now, the fees would be $43 million, but when Utah State left, it's now up to $55 million. Now, based on all the financial, models that we've seen, obviously the Pac-12 cannot afford that. I mean, maybe not the Pac-12 in and of itself, but the individual schools might be able to. But the thing is, too, I that's going through my mind is if you're Boise State, San Diego State, or Oregon or Washington State, you had to anticipate this pushback. So when I really, settle all this down, I mean, really the most simplistic way to boil this all down is at the end of the day, the Pac-12 is filing this lawsuit to really try to negotiate the exit fee. I mean, based on the agreement, there's really no way out of paying some sort of fee. And, of course, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to the legality of it. But, we even saw this when Clemson and Florida State were trying to leave the ACC. Their argument is, oh, it's not competitive. Oh, you're charging so many fees. Oh, we're stuck in this contract, and trying to find every little loophole that you possibly can to get out of the contract. And that's in essence what the Pac-12 is really trying to do as well. Because I mean, yeah, of course they had no leverage, and the Mountain West didn't need them. They were fine when back in the early 2010s when they essentially merged with the WAC and had their own little conference, and they played good competitive football, and the local people in the area really do enjoy the Mountain West Conference. It's the one thing I really do admire about all of those type of schools. How loyal the Wyoming fan base is, New Mexico State's. Even though there are such small schools, at the same time, there really is a nucleus of fans that really do follow the team, and a lot of those coaching staffs really do stay for an extended periods of time. You really don't see as much movement. Like for example, Craig Ball, who was Wyoming's head coach for a number of seasons before he ultimately retired, and he was with North Dakota State for a number of years, won a bunch of FCS championships, and pretty much built the foundation for them being a FCS powerhouse to begin with. But in essence, I mean, really, really, this shouldn't be that big of a deal to everybody. I think ultimately what's going to end up happening is, they're going to they're going to negotiate this down in a sense, and the Mountain West should be able to still get enough money out of the Pac-12 to the point where you can either poach some schools from the Conference USA or the AAC possibly. You could go down that avenue again. Or, if you do decide to go the FCS route, you could try to target the Idaho States, North Dakota State, North Dakota, all of the, and Weber State, Montana, possibly too. But, you know, I had an interesting conversation with another insider about this, and really the reality of why these schools don't really want to join is one, you it's absorbently more expensive to be an FBS school than an FCS school in general, because one, you have to deal with much similar. I think Hawaii has a very similar problem as Wyoming, Montana, is just how much more expensive it's going to be to travel to all these different schools now. So you're probably paying double, triple what you used to, compared to just staying within the regional aspects of it. I mean, even when it's Montana going up against North Dakota, I mean, you're traveling about 900 to 1,000 miles in some aspects, which is an equivalent of going from Florida to New Jersey, and that's just within a couple states of each other. So when you view this kind of holistically, I think the reality is that the Pac-12 definitely knew about these fees going into it, and obviously they're not going to challenge it within the moment because they the Mountain West had to know that this was coming, and based on the commissioner's comments, that definitely was going to happen. But number two, it's to what extent does the Mountain West decide to kind of give in and negotiate the fee out to them, or are they going to play hardball and say, you know what, we're just going to, it doesn't matter to us, we're just going to keep on going and going and going until you guys just don't have as much money anymore. And when you think about all the uncertainties with the Pac-12, it definitely still makes you wonder whether or not a merger definitely still realistic. I mean, that definitely could be the outcome still. I think, you know, just from my general perspective, I think that would be the best outcome for everybody if you can combine the resources of what was left over in the Pac-12 plus the resources of the Mountain West. I mean, obviously you can't have a 18 team conference. I mean, you're probably going to have to leave out a couple of schools, but I would have to imagine that combining those conferences together would make everybody stronger, which leads to another conversation of the whole power conference merging together, kind of like what Chip Kelly was suggesting last year when he was the head coach of UCLA, kind of like a equivalent of a super league. So when yes, you do see the big numbers and all that, but ultimately, this lawsuit is really just a way to try to negotiate the penalties that Pac-12 knew what was coming already. So within the couple days, I think we're going to see just to what extent is the Mountain West going to be negotiable about it. But the reality is that all the provisions and all the negotiations were already there, and it's more or less going to come down to to what extent will the Mountain West be negotiable with this new revamped Pac-12?